Hello. Tonight we're going to settle in together and wander all the way back to the very first nights when people looked up at the stars and felt something enormous watching them back. Something with wings made of fire and a heartbeat older than language itself. So, before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you're tucked in somewhere right now, maybe leave a little comment with where you are and what time it is there. I always love knowing who's drifting off with me. Now, dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. Long before anyone wrote a single word about dragons, there were evenings just like this one, quiet, heavy with the smell of wood smoke, the kind that clings to wool blankets and makes your eyelids feel pleasantly tired. Picture a small circle of people crouched around a low fire on an open plain. The flames are small, almost shy, throwing orange light onto faces still dusted with the day's red earth. Above them the sky is a deep indigo bowl, so clear you can see the Milky Way spilled across it like cream someone forgot to stir. And every now and then a spark rises from the fire, climbs, pops softly, and vanishes upward, as if the stars themselves are breathing. On nights like that, someone always notices the bones first. They're half buried in the riverbank a morning's walk away, huge things, longer than a grown man is tall, curved like the moon when it almost disappears. The elders say the river gave them up after the last flood, the same way it sometimes coughs up smooth stones or the antlers of deer that lived before anyone can remember. Children run their small hands along the ribs and feel how impossibly wide they are, how the bone is thicker than their entire arm. One of the old women, the one whose voice sounds like dry leaves brushing together, whispers that these belong to a creature that once drank the river dry when it was thirsty. Everyone laughs quietly, because it feels true, even if it can't be. That is the beginning. Not a story yet, just the hush that falls when ordinary things turn out to be gates to something too large to name. A little later, maybe seasons later, maybe lifetimes, a storm comes in from the west. It is the kind of storm that feels personal. The clouds stack themselves into towers so dark they look bruised, and the wind smells like metal. Lightning forks down again and again, not in polite flashes, but in long, cracking veins that stay lit long enough to show the shape of something moving inside the cloud. To the people watching from the mouth of their cave, it looks like a spine of pure light bending and twisting. Thunder follows so close, it feels like a giant hand clapping right behind their skulls. A child starts to cry. Not from fear, exactly, but from the size of the sound. When the rain finally eases, the air is washed clean, and everything smells like wet stone. Steam rises from the ground in slow curls. Someone says, very softly, that they saw it. The storm had scales. Another person nods and says they saw eyes, red as the coals they're poking back to life. No one argues. No one laughs. The moment is too heavy, like the blanket of night itself has settled on their shoulders and refuses to be shrugged off. That is the second beginning, when weather and bone start to speak the same language. Historians still argue whether the very first dragon was born from dinosaur fossils or from the way lightning seems to hunt across the sky, but most agree the sparks met somewhere in the human chest and caught fire. Those enormous bones, sauropods, mostly, or the occasional megalania, washed down from distant mountains, lay exposed in dry riverbeds across Africa, Asia, Europe, for hundreds of thousands of years. Early humans didn't need museums. The world was their museum, open air and unlabeled, a protruding vertebra the size of a millstone, a thigh bone that took 4 men to lift. These were not curiosities. They were evidence that the earth had once carried beings larger than anything walking now. And then there were the smaller, stranger finds. In some places the ground gave up claws, curved like sickles, or teeth longer than a man's hand, serrated like the edge of a saw. We know now they belonged to theropods, to spinosaurs, to creatures that vanished 65 million years before the first campfire. But to the people who carefully carried those teeth home and hung them on leather cords around their necks, they were proof that something with a mouth full of knives had once ruled the daylight. Here's a quirky little detail most bedtime tales forget. Some of those ancient bone hunters weren't above a bit of creative rearrangement. In parts of ancient Mongolia, archaeologists have found protoceratops, skulls deliberately placed next to pairs of clawed forearms, almost as if someone long ago wanted to help the skeleton look a little more alive. A beak became a snarling jaw. Brow horns became fiery eyes. The first special effect, staged by firelight for wide-eyed children who would grow up and tell their own children the creature had only gone to sleep under the hill. Over thousands of slow evenings, the stories grew the way moss grows on north-facing stones, quietly, steadily, until one day you look and the whole rock is soft and green. The bones became a body. The lightning became breath. The red sunset glowing through storm clouds became scales. And the deep, almost sub-audible hum you can sometimes feel in your chest when thunder rolls far away, that became the creature's heart, still beating somewhere just past the edge of the world. No one decided to invent the dragon. It simply happened the way dew happens on grass or sleep happens after a long day. One generation added a tail that could crush a forest. The next gave it wings the colour of storm clouds at midnight. Another listened to a cave breathing cold air and decided the beast must sleep beneath the mountain, dreaming the same dreams they were dreaming around the fire. Each small addition felt less like making something up and more like remembering something that had almost slipped away. And sometimes, very rarely, the world seemed to remember with them. There are old accounts, carved on mammoth ivory, painted inside caves no one has entered for 30,000 years, of long creatures with legs like tree trunks and necks that reach the sky. The paint is faded red and black, the lines uncertain, but the shape is unmistakable. Scholars still argue whether these are the very first dragons, or simply the first time someone tried to draw the feeling of standing next to a bone too large to carry home. Either way, the image lingered. It waited in the dark until the next fire was lit, the next storm rolled in, the next child asked why the stars sometimes fall. So when you lie back tonight, and the room is quiet, except for the soft hum of whatever keeps you company, a fan, maybe, or distant traffic, think of those first small circles of light on the vast dark plain. Think of the way a single rib, glowing in the firelight, can cast a shadow that looks, just for a moment, like the curve of a wing. The dragon was never far away. It was only sleeping, curled around the bones of the world, breathing in time with every heart that ever wondered what those bones once carried. And somewhere, under layers of centuries and cities and ordinary days, it is still breathing. The fire has burned low now, just a nest of ruby coals breathing softly under a blanket of ash. Outside, the night feels wider than it did an hour ago, as though the sky has taken a slow, deep breath and held it. If you tip your head back, even just a little, you can feel the cool air sliding across your face like dark water. And up there, scattered across the velvet black, the stars are beginning to tell their oldest story. Long before anyone thought to give the dragon a name, people gave it a home among the lights that never die. Look with me for a moment. See that slow, bending river of stars we call the Milky Way? In the quiet deserts of Australia, the first peoples saw it as a great serpent swimming through a celestial waterhole, its body so long it wrapped the entire world. When the dry season came and the real rivers shrank to dust, they said the sky serpent was holding all the water until the people sang it back down again. You can almost hear the didgeridoo humming under that thought, low and patient, the way a huge creature might hum in its sleep. Farther north, in the yellow plains of ancient China, court astronomers lay on silk cushions atop observatory towers and traced a different dragon across the same sky. To them the stars around the North Pole formed the creature's coiled body, while 4 bright stars made the corners of a palace it guarded forever. They called it the azure dragon of the east when spring arrived, the vermilion bird in summer heat. But the dragon was always there first, oldest of the 4 guardians, turning slowly around the still point of the world like a promise that everything circles back. Even in the cold forests of northern Europe, where winters pressed close and long, people looked up and saw a serpent made of starlight. The constellation we now call Draco wins between the 2 bears, its tail looped, its head pointed forever toward the horizon. Old Norse storytellers said it was Nidhugger, the corpse chewer, gnawing quietly at the roots of the world tree while the stars wheeled above. Children were told, never frightened by the name, the dragon was too far away, too slow-moving, more like a guardian of night itself than anything that might come down and hurt you. Historians still argue whether every culture invented its sky dragon separately, or whether one very old idea drifted across continents the way seeds drift on wind. What no one argues about is how natural it felt. Rivers on the ground twist the same way star rivers twist in the sky. Both shine silver at night. Both seem to move while you're standing still. It takes no great leap to imagine the same creature living in both places at once, dipping its head to drink from the Euphrates or Yangtze, then lifting it again to sip starlight. Here's a small, strange detail that makes me smile every time I remember it. In parts of ancient Greece, people noticed that the constellation Draco never sets. It simply circles the pole star, always visible, always watching. They decided this proved the dragon was immortal. To celebrate, some villages held a quiet festival once a year where everyone stayed awake all night, wrapped in wool cloaks, sharing warm wine and honey cakes while the dragon turned overhead. A gentle all-night party for an undying serpent, there's something wonderfully tender about that. And then there were the falling stars. You know the feeling. You're half dreaming. The fire is only embers. And suddenly a bright line scratches across the dark. Your heart lifts before your mind catches up. In ancient Babylon, they believed each falling star was a scale flaking off the great dragon's back as it shifted in its cosmic sleep. The priests kept careful count. Too many falling scales in one night meant the dragon was restless, and kings should be careful about starting wars. A single falling star, though, was lucky proof the dragon had turned over and dreamed something kind about the tiny people far below. Imagine lying on a grass mat in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. The air smells of river mud and warm bread. A baby is breathing softly beside you. Somewhere a reed flute plays 3 slow notes and stops, as if the player fell asleep mid-thought. And above you the sky serpent glides without sound, its body made of 1,000 stars sliding along the same path it has taken since the world was new. There is no hurry in that movement, no threat, only the gentlest reminder that you are being held inside something enormous and patient. Across the world, in the Americas, the Lakota saw a different shape but felt the same hush. To them the Milky Way was a spinal column of star bison running across the sky, hunted by a celestial dragon whose breath was the northern lights. When the aurora danced green and rose, Mothers told their children the dragon had found its prey and was celebrating. The lights flickered like slow fire, and every colour soft as silk, and no one was afraid. How could you be afraid of a hunter who painted the sky to share its joy? All these stories share the same quiet heartbeat. The dragon is not coming to burn the village tonight. It is simply there, older than mountains, breathing in time with the seasons. Spring arrives when it stretches, winter deepens when it coils tighter. Rain falls when it weeps, for reasons no human will ever understand. The creature is too vast for anger the way we know anger. Its moods are weather, its thoughts are rivers of light. Sometimes, on nights when the air is perfectly still and the stars seem close enough to touch, you can almost feel the slow turning of that ancient body. A faint shift, like a sleeper adjusting under heavy blankets. The constellations drift a finger's width westward, and for a moment the space between you and the dragon feels paper thin. That is the gift the first stargazers left us, not fear, but belonging. The dragon was never separate from the sky. The sky was never separate from the people looking up. Everything was one long, quiet creature dreaming itself across eternity, and every human heartbeat was just a soft echo inside its larger dream. So when you look up tonight, wherever you are, let your eyes rest on that pale river of light. Let the cool night air settle on your skin the way it settled on theirs. Somewhere in the dark between stars, the first dragon is still turning, slow as seasons, gentle as breath. And if a single star chooses this moment to fall, maybe it's only a scale loosening, a quiet greeting from something that has watched over every campfire since the very first one flickered to life. The night holds us both, you and me, the same way it held them. And the dragon, older than words, keeps circling. The coals have gone silver now, barely a heartbeat of warmth left under the ash. Outside, the wind has found its voice again, low and steady, the way it moves across flat desert when there is nothing tall enough to argue with it. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the fine grains of sand drifting against your cheek. Even here, even now, centuries away from the place where the first cities learned to fear the night. In the land between two rivers, the nights were never truly dark. The moon hung low and orange, the colour of hot bronze cooling in a forge, and the stars pressed so close you could hear them hum. But when the wind rose, though, everything changed. It came from the west carrying the breath of 1,000 miles of empty sand, and it carried something else too, an older presence that had no name yet, only a shape felt in the throat and the soles of the feet. People learned early to read the signs. When the signs, a haze on the horizon at noon, the way birds suddenly fell silent, the way the air tasted of metal. Then the sky turned the colour of a lion's pelt, and the light died all at once. The storm arrived not with rain, but with a roaring darkness full of teeth. Sand hissed against mud brick walls, found every crack, filled every mouth with grit. Camels groaned and turned their backs. Children were pressed against their mothers' robes so tightly they could feel 2 heartbeats racing. And inside that roaring darkness, something moved. It had wings the size of date palm groves, wings made of the storm itself. Its body was long and shining, part serpent, part lion, part eagle, stitched together from everything the desert could throw at a person. When it passed overhead, the wind screamed like a living thing. Lightning flashed inside its ribs. No one saw it clearly. No one needed to. The feeling was enough. Enormous, ancient, and not entirely unkind. When the storm finally spent itself and the stars came back, pale and trembling, people stepped outside into a world wiped clean. The air smelled of wet earth even though no rain had fallen. Footprints were gone, cook fires erased, every sharp edge softened. And sometimes, very rarely, someone would find a single long feather lying in the courtyard, black as obsidian, yet warm to the touch. They carried it inside without speaking, wrapped it in soft cloth, and placed it high on the household shrine. A promise, perhaps, or a thank you. That was the birth of the protective dragon spirits of Mesopotamia. We know their names now because someone pressed a reed stylus into soft clay 5,000 years ago and left them for us. Tiamat, the saltwater mother who was also a dragon of chaos. Mushusu, the splendid serpent with lion paws and a scorpion tail. Usumgal, the great dragon who walked beside the first kings. But long before the names, there were only the storms and the feeling of being noticed by something too large to look at directly. Here is a quirky detail that always makes me smile in the quiet. In the city of Babylon, temple workers kept careful records of every sandstorm, noting the exact hour it began and ended. Beside some entries, they drew a tiny winged serpent curled around the date. When archaeologists found those tablets, they thought at first the scribes were bored and doodling. Then they realized the storms marked with the serpent almost never killed anyone. The ones without the scribes left blank were the deadly ones. Even then, people understood the difference between a storm that scours and a storm that shelters. Historians still argue whether the Mesopotamians truly believed their dragon guardians were separate beings, or simply the desert's way of speaking in a voice humans could bear to hear. Either way, the cities grew up under that voice. When a new king took the throne, he was handed a lapis lazuli cylinder seal, carved with Mushusu standing behind him, forepaws raised in protection. The message was gentle but firm. Rule wisely, or the storm will remember you are only dust. At night the ziggurats rose like stepped mountains against the stars, and priests in white linen climbed slowly to the top platform carrying bowls of incense and fresh water. They poured the water in a thin stream that caught the moonlight and looked, for a moment, like a silver scale falling. Then they sang, not loudly, just enough for the wind to carry the notes out across the rooftops, where families lay on reed mats, half awake, listening. The song had no words we still understand, only long vowels that rose and fell like breathing. And sometimes, when the air was just right, the smoke from the incense would twist itself into slow coils that lingered far longer than smoke should, almost as if an invisible body were holding it in shape. Children growing up in those brick houses learned two truths before they could walk far. The desert wants to eat the world, and something in the desert also wants the world to keep existing. The same wind that buried a caravan could uncover an ancient well the city had forgotten. The same wings that blotted out the sun could turn aside and leave a pocket of calm where a mother could give birth or an old man could die in peace. Everything depended on whether the great serpent was feeling generous that day. So people left small offerings at the city gates. A bowl of beer, a twist of wool dyed bright red, 7 dates arranged in a circle. Nothing grand. The dragon was not a god to be bribed, only a vast neighbour to be greeted politely when it passed by. And it did pass by, year after year, century after century, its shadow sweeping across the fields like a cool hand on fevered skin. There is a tablet from the city of Nippur that tells of a night when the storm came so fiercely the moon itself seemed to hide. The king climbed the ziggurat alone, carrying only a lantern made from a single shard of alabaster. At the top he set the lantern down and spoke. Not a prayer exactly, more like the words you use when you meet an old friend on the road and realize you have both grown older. When he came down again at dawn, his hair had turned white, but the city still stood, and every child born that year was said to carry a tiny birthmark shaped like a curling tail. We will never know what he said to the storm. Some stories are too large for clay. Tonight, wherever you are, the wind outside your window is only a small, tired thing compared to those ancient desert breaths. But if it sighs against the glass and you feel, just for a second, the faintest brush of enormous wings, folding themselves away until they are needed again. Remember the cities that slept safely because someone long ago understood that even terror can be protective if you learn to greet it with an open hand. The desert is still out there, patient as starlight, and it has not forgotten how to sing. The night has grown softer now, almost liquid. If you let your hand rest outside the blanket, you can feel how the air has cooled, how it carries the faint memory of water somewhere far away. Close your eyes with me and listen for the slow heartbeat of a river that has never stopped moving in 6,000 years. In Egypt, the Nile was never just a river. It was the country's single vein, its black blood rising and falling with the seasons. When it flooded, the world turned to warm mud and green shoots. When it shrank, the land cracked open like dry lips. Life and death lived in the same water, and both wore the same long golden smile. Everyone knew the smile belonged to the crocodiles. They lay half submerged among the papyrus, only their eyes and nostrils showing, patient as statues carved by a god who had all the time in the world. A fisherman poling home at twilight might see one slide off the bank without a splash, a living log suddenly remembering it had teeth. Children were taught to sing softly when they went to fill water jars, because loud voices carried across the water, and the creatures liked music about as much as they liked supper. But the crocodiles were only the river's visible children. Beneath them moved something older. On certain afternoons, when the sun stood directly overhead and the air shimmered like hot syrup, the horizon itself seemed to ripple. Travellers swore they saw a second river floating above the first, upside down, its surface made of hammered bronze scales. Camels refused to go farther. Dogs whined and tucked their tails. And wise men shaded their eyes and spoke the name they barely dared to breathe. Apep. Apep was not a crocodile. Apep was the idea that the river could unmake itself, that the sun could fail to rise tomorrow, that everything good and ordered might one day simply be swallowed. He was the serpent who lived in the space between heartbeats, long as the Nile, thick as night, with eyes like burning oil. Every evening he tried to eat the sun as it sank into the western cliffs. Every evening the sun slipped down his throat and travelled through his body all night, only to be born again at dawn, slick and shining and alive. The fight was never loud. It happened in perfect silence while people slept, but everyone woke knowing it had taken place, because the morning light felt hard-won, like bread still warm from the ashes. Here is a small, strange thing that still makes scholars smile. In the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, painters sometimes drew Apep with his body knotted around itself, pierced by dozens of knives. Yet beside those knives they always painted a little cat, small, calm, tail curled neatly, watching the struggle. The cat was the goddess Mafdet, quiet as a house cat, yet somehow able to slice chaos itself into harmless pieces. A gentle reminder, perhaps, that even the darkest serpent can be tamed by something soft and unafraid. Historians still argue whether Apep began as a real memory of some enormous prehistoric crocodile, maybe the 40-foot Sarcosuchus whose bones have been found in the Sahara, or whether the desert heat simply taught people to see monsters in every shimmer. Either way, the fear was useful. It kept children from swimming too far. It kept fishermen from lingering after dusk. And it gave priests something enormous to stand against every single night. At sunset, the temples filled with low chanting. Barefoot priests in white linen walked the processional ways, carrying torches that hissed in the cooling air. They sang to Ra, the sun, begging him to be brave inside the serpent's belly. They sang to Set, the red god of storms and disorder, asking him to use his strength on the right side tonight. And sometimes, very softly, they sang to the serpent himself not to destroy him, because chaos can never be destroyed, only persuaded to lie down again. In the city of Thebes there was a sacred lake where the priests launched tiny reed boats at midnight. Each boat carried a wax figure of Apex stabbed through with thorns. They set them alight and let the current take them. By morning the lake would be scattered with soft black ash that looked, from a distance, like the scales of something that had finally grown tired of fighting. Ordinary people had quieter rituals. A mother drawing water at dawn would pour out the first cup onto the ground, a gift for whatever watched from the deep. A farmer walking his field borders at twilight would tap his staff 3 times and whisper, "Stay below, Great One, stay below." No one expected the serpent to obey forever. They only asked for one more day, one more season, one more chance for the barley to ripen. And almost always, the day came, yet every few generations the river betrayed them. The flood failed, or it rose too high and swept entire villages away. The sun burned white and merciless. Crocodiles grew bold and took children in plain sight. In those years the name Apep was spoken aloud more often, and the wax boats burned longer into the night. People understood that the serpent was not evil, the way a thief is evil. He was simply the shadow cast by everything bright. Without him the light would have no edges. There is a fragment of papyrus, fragile as a moth wing, that tells of a night when the moon turned blood red and the river itself seemed to stop moving. A young priestess walked alone to the water's edge, carrying nothing but a clay lamp. She set it on the surface and watched it drift toward the center current. The lamp did not sink. It floated upright all night, a tiny star on black water, until the moon paled and the river began its usual whisper again. When she returned to the temple, her hair had gone white at the temples, but she smiled as if she had been given a secret too large for words. We will never know what she saw. Some gifts are meant to stay between a woman and the dark water. So when you hear water moving tonight, maybe the hum of a distant fountain, maybe only the soft tick of an ice maker, think of that slow Nile heartbeat. Think of crocodiles sleeping under lotus leaves, of heat haze shaping itself into coils no one can quite focus on. Think of priests singing the sun safely through the serpent's belly one more time. The river still carries both the danger and the mercy. It always has. And somewhere beneath the ordinary moon, the great serpent turns over in his sleep, dreaming of the day he will finally swallow the light forever, or the day he will choose, for reasons only water understands, to let it go again. The night is gentle with us now, but it remembers when gentleness had teeth. The air has turned cool enough that the blanket feels like a small kindness against your shoulders. Somewhere far off, a night bird calls once and thinks better of it. Let the quiet settle, and come with me now to a different shore, one where the sea is wine dark and the mountains sometimes open their mouths and breathe fire. Long before anyone wrote down the name Typhon or Ladon or Python, the people who lived under those restless hills already knew the earth itself could roar. They felt it in their knees first, a low trembling that made goats lift their heads and babies stop crying. Then came the smell, hot stone and rotten eggs drifting down the slopes. And finally the sky turned the colour of old blood, while a pillar of black smoke rose straight up, as though the mountain had decided to grow a new, darker peak. When night fell after one of those days, the glow on the horizon looked exactly like an eye watching. That was the first western dragon, born not from river mud or desert wind, but from stone that refused to stay asleep. The islands of the Aegean are small, and the volcanoes are not. Santorini, Nisyros, Methana, places where the ground still steams, and the sea around them boils when the mood takes it. Sailors learned to give those waters a wide berth, because sometimes the water itself would hiss and turn white, and fish floated belly up with their eyes cooked. They said the dragon lived under the waves there, coiled around the roots of the world, and when it stretched, the sea burned. On the mainland, the caves told a quieter version of the same story, the hills riddled with tunnels that breathed cold air even in summer. Shepherds who took shelter from sudden rain sometimes found openings that went deeper than any man had reason to go. They came back speaking of distant roaring water, of air so hot it blistered lips, of smooth black walls that looked melted. One old man from Delphi swore he had seen a single bronze scale, the size of a shield, wedged between two boulders. Still warm hours after sunrise, he left it where it lay. Some things are safer left sleeping. Here's a small, odd detail that always feels like a secret shared across centuries. In the ashes of Thera, the great eruption that swallowed half of Santorini 3,600 years ago, archaeologists keep finding tiny clay figurines of coiled serpents with human faces. No one knows who made them or why, but they were placed carefully in doorways, as if the people believed that showing the dragon its own likeness might calm it down. A child's drawing left on the fridge for a very large, very dangerous parent. Historians still argue whether the 100-headed typhon was born from those eruptions, or whether the eruptions simply gave storytellers the colours they needed. Black smoke for his breath, red lightning for his eyes. A voice like islands apart. What no one argues about is how perfectly the land itself seemed to collaborate. When the poets finally sang of Typhon rising against Zeus, they described him tearing mountains from their roots and hurling them skyward, exactly the way lava bombs still arc across the night during a strong eruption, glowing like slow and terrible before they cool into new stone. And then there were the caves that steamed without fire. At Delphi, high on the flank of Mount Parnassus, a crack in the rock exhaled sweet-smelling vapour that made the priestess speak in tongues. They called her the Pythia, and before she took the tripod seat, she had to be purified, because the dragon Python had once owned that place. Apollo, bright and young and merciless, shot him full of arrows and claimed the cave for prophecy. But the vapour kept rising, and the priestess kept trembling, and every so often the earth shook just enough to remind everyone whose house it had been first. Children growing up in those mountain villages learned to read the moods of the land the way sailors read the sea. A sudden flight of crows from a certain ridge, a new smell on the wind, the way goats refused to graze near a particular meadow. All signs the dragon was restless. On those nights when the moon was thin and red, mothers tucked their children in early and left a bowl of honeyed milk outside the door, not because they expected the dragon to drink it, but because sweetness sometimes soothes even stone. There is a story, quiet and half forgotten, about a goatherd from the island of Lemnos. Every 7th year, the forge fires under the island burned so hot that the sea around it steamed and the fish died. The people carried a young girl, dressed in saffron and crowned with olive leaves, down to the shore at dusk. They set her on a small boat and pushed her out into the mist. The next morning the fires cooled, the sea calmed, and the girl was never seen again. They said the dragon took her gently, the way a cat carries a kitten, and gave her a place among the embers where she would never be cold. A terrible bargain, maybe, but the island people understand that living next to something older than mercy sometimes asks for payment in softness. Even the names of the monsters carry the taste of smoke. Chimera with her lion-goat-serpent body breathing fire on the hills of Lycia. The Hydra whose necks sprouted again whenever Heracles cut them, as if the lava flows of Nisyros still sprout new channels when the old ones are blocked. Every hero who fought them was really fighting the land itself, trying to pin down something that would never stay pinned. Yet the same mountains that birthed monsters also sheltered people. The caves that steamed by day were cool refuge when the sun burned. Springs bubbled up sweet and clear from cracks that smelled of sulphur. Olive trees grew twisted but strong on slopes no gentle valley would give them. Life and terror shared the same black soil, and children learned both before they learned to read. So when you feel the mattress shift slightly under you tonight, or when the radiator gives its small metallic sigh, think of those old Greek hills breathing in their sleep. Think of shepherds listening to the earth grumble and choosing, every morning, to stay. The dragon was never only destruction. It was also the forge that taught humans how to work bronze, the heat that ripened grapes until they burst with sweetness, the deep, quiet cave where the first stories were whispered so the mountain itself could hear them. Somewhere under the crust of the world, the old fire still turns over, dreaming in slow motion. And every so often it stretches, and a new island rises from the sea, or an old one sighs and slips beneath the waves. The night holds its breath with it, and we, small and brief as sparks, keep listening. The night has folded itself around us now, soft and close, the way old wool settles after many washings. Somewhere in the house a clock ticks once, then thinks better of it. Let the silence stay quiet, and come walk with me along a narrow mountain path, lit only by starlight and the faint red memory of volcanoes that have not quite gone to sleep. This is the moment the dragon changed its face. For countless slow centuries the great serpents had been guardians, storm-bringers, river-keepers, star rivers, the breathing skin of the world itself. People left honey outside the door and spoke to them the way you speak to thunder. Respectfully, hopefully, never quite certain you will be heard. Then something shifted, gentle as a page turning in a heavy book, and suddenly the same creatures were something a young man could kill to prove he had become a man. It did not happen all at once. First came the stories of borderlands, places where the ordered fields ended and the wild hills began. A village loses sheep. A spring dries. A child wanders too far and does not come home at dusk. Someone must go look. Someone strong. Someone who can carry a bronze-faced shield that flashes like a second moon. Someone willing to walk into the dark carrying only fire and a promise. They went because the village asked, but also because the night inside them asked louder. The first heroes were not proud. They were afraid, and fear made them careful. They left at dawn with bread and salt in a small pouch, a spear newly tipped, and their mother's voice still warm in their ears. They followed goat tracks up into the cedar forests, where the air smelled of resin and something older. They found caves that breathed out warmth like an animal, or cold like a well. And sometimes, deep inside, something moved. Not always with malice. Sometimes the dragon only opened one slow eye, the colour of banked coals, and regarded the trembling boy the way an old cat regards a mouse that has foolishly walked into the hearth-room. Most of those early meetings ended quietly, the boy backing away, heart-hammering, returning to the village with nothing but a story and a sudden respect for how small bravery actually is. But stories grow teeth when they travel. By the time the songs reached the king's hall, the dragon had become cruel, greedy, a hoarder of gold and maidens, a blight on the land. The boy had become tall and shining, his fear polished away until only the bronze shield remained. The quiet meeting in the cave became a battle that shook mountains. The dragon died roaring, the hero walked out trailing smoke, and the village slept easy for a season. That is how the shift happened. Here is a small, almost tender detail most songs leave out. In the oldest fragments of the tale of Cadmus, the man who had found Thebes, he does not kill the dragon out of hatred. The serpent is sacred to Ares and guards a spring the settlers need. Cadmus fights because his men are dying of thirst, and when the dragon finally falls, he weeps, plants its teeth in the earth, and from those teeth grow armed men who become the ancestors of the city. Destruction becomes creation. Death waters the future. Even in the new story, the dragon is still giving, only now the gift hurts. Historians still argue whether the change came from new weapons, bronze being harder than faith, or from new kings who needed young men to prove loyalty by bringing back something dramatic. Probably both. When a palace wants a war, it helps to have a monster no one has ever seen clearly. Yet the old feeling never quite left. Even in the loudest telling of Heracles and the Hydra, there is a pause after the second head grows back. A moment when the hero stands ankle deep in black blood and realizes the creature is not fighting to win. It is simply being what it is. The marsh itself rising to protect its own heart. For one breath the song grows quiet, and you can almost hear the older story trying to speak through the noise. In Crete they told of a dragon coiled beneath the palace at Knossos. Not evil, only ancient, guarding the labyrinth where the Minotaur waited. Theseus killed the Minotaur, but the dragon beneath the stones was never mentioned again. As if everyone understood some foundations are safer left sleeping. On windy nights in Argos, old women still left a small bowl of milk on the doorstep for the one who used to watch the sheep. They never said the dragon's name aloud, but the bowl was always empty by morning, licked clean, the clay warm as if a large tongue had passed over it slowly, carefully, remembering manners. The heroes kept coming, Perseus, Jason, Bellerophon, each brighter and younger than the last, each carrying better armour, each leaving behind a larger corpse and a quieter countryside. The songs grew louder, the shields grew shinier, and the dragons grew fewer. Some retreated into the far north where the air itself burns the lungs. Some sank beneath the sea and learned to breathe water instead of fire. A few, the wisest, simply became landscape, a ridge of stone that looks, from a distance, like a sleeping neck, a cliff face with hollows that might once have been eyes. The world felt safer and emptier. But on certain evenings, when the first star appears and the wind moves through olive leaves like a sigh, you can still feel the older presence waiting. Not angry, only patient. The same way a grandfather waits for children to finish their noisy games and remember he is in the room. The heroes are long dust now, their bronze shields green with age in museums. The songs have gone quiet. And somewhere under the hill, or beneath the wine-dark sea, or curled inside the red heart of a mountain that still smokes from time to time, the old guardians breathe once, slow as centuries, and dream of the days when a bowl of honeyed milk was enough. The night remembers both stories. It always has. And it is telling them both to you now, in the soft space between one breath and the next. The dark has settled so completely that even the edges of the furniture have gone soft. Somewhere a radiator gives a small, sleepy click, like an old man clearing his throat before telling the best part of the story. Let the quiet hold you and drift eastward now, past deserts and high plateaus, until the air turns warm and damp and smells faintly of rain on bamboo. Here the dragon never needed wings. It was born in the slow exhale of summer clouds that pile themselves against the mountains until they spill over like milk from an overfull bowl. When the first fat drops hit the rice fields, the farmers lift their faces and smile the way you smile when an old friend finally comes home. The thunder that follows is not angry. It is the dragon clearing its throat after a long winter nap. ready to speak in the low, rolling voice of water, returning to water. They call him Long. He has the head of a camel, gentle and long-nosed, the eyes of a deer, soft enough to make you trust him before you notice the claws. His body is a serpent's, but covered in scales that shimmer the colour of wet kingfisher feathers, each one edged with gold like the rim of a porcelain cup held to candlelight. Antlers branch from his brow, not for fighting but for feeling the wind the way trees feel it, slow and patient. And beneath his chin grows a single pearl, the quiet heart of every storm. He does not roar, he hums. Listen, on a monsoon night along the Yangtze, the river rises, brown and thick with silt, carrying whole trees like matchsticks. Lanterns bob on the current, red paper glowing from within like small hearts. And if you stand very still on the levee, you can feel the dragon pass beneath your feet, a long, cool ribbon of current sliding against the warmer water above, turning the whole river into one living silk. Children press their palms to the wet stone and swear they feel a pulse that is not their own. Here is a small, lovely detail most Western tales never mention. Every Chinese dragon carries a lump of earth in his claw, a reminder that he is bound to the land the way roots are bound. When drought cracks the fields until the soil looks like a shattered bowl, the dragon kings rise into the clouds and weep. Their tears fall straight and heavy, drumming on lotus leaves, until the ponds fill and the frogs begin their nightly chorus again. Farmers wake to find the rice standing ankle deep in silver water and bow 3 times toward whichever direction the thunder came from, murmuring she, the way you would thank a neighbour who lent sugar without being asked. Historians still argue whether the idea of the benevolent dragon arrived with the first rice planters who needed the rain to come on time, or whether the rain itself taught people gentleness by arriving wrapped in such beauty. Either way, the dragon became the only large creature in the world who was never asked to be small. In spring, the emperor himself performed the ploughing ceremony, guiding a yellow ox across a sacred field, while 4 dragon banners snapped overhead, one for each direction. The message was simple. Even the Son of Heaven borrows strength from the creature who commands water and weather. Palaces were roofed with glazed tiles that curved upward at the edges, so the dragons could slide down them at night without hurting their bellies. On every ridgepole marched a line of little ceramic beasts, the leader always with one foot lifted, forever walking the first to greet the coming storm. Children grew up drawing dragons the way other children draw suns with smiling faces, a single flowing line for the body, a few quick flicks for claws, dots for eyes that somehow always looked amused. Teachers never corrected them. A dragon drawn with love was thought to bring gentle rain. On the Dragon Boat Festival, the rivers filled with long, narrow boats painted scarlet and emerald, each prow carved into an open dragon mouth. Drums beat like summer thunder while rowers pulled in perfect rhythm, racing the rain itself. When the first drops finally fell, the crowd cheered because the dragon had accepted their invitation and come to watch. There is a quiet story from the Yellow River, so old it has almost worn smooth. A village suffered 7 years of drought until a girl with bound feet and unbound courage walked to the riverbank carrying only a bowl of tea. She set it on the water at twilight and sang the lullaby her mother sang to her when storms frightened her as a baby. The river answered with a single ripple that grew into a coil, then a neck, then the calm face of an old dragon rising just high enough for his whiskers to brush the surface. He drank the tea, bowed once, and the rains began before she reached home. Her footprints filled with water as she walked, and lotuses grew in them the next year. No one ever learned her name. The village only remembers that kindness is sometimes measured in a single bowl of tea, offered without expectation. At night, the palace eunuchs lit incense that smelled of sandalwood and wet stone. Courtiers slept on bamboo mats under silk canopies painted with clouds and cranes, dreaming of flying without ever leaving the ground. Sometimes the emperor himself woke to find dew on his pillow, though the windows were closed, a gentle reminder that even imperial roofs belong, in the end, to the rain. And always, everywhere, the dragon was movement. Not the stiff beating of bat wings, but the fluid glide of river meeting sea, of cloud becoming rain, becoming river again. The dragon did not conquer the sky. He became it, curling through cumulus the way smoke curls through fingers. Patient as seasons, generous as spring. So when you feel the air grow heavy tonight, when the first cool drop finds the back of your hand and another slides down the window like a slow tear, think of the long body turning over in its sleep above the rice fields. Think of antlers catching moonlight, of scales the colour of dawn on water, of a pearl glowing softly under a chin that has never learned cruelty. The dragon is still humming, low and steady, the same note he has hummed since the first monsoon taught the world how to be gentle. Listen, you can almost hear it in the soft patter on the roof, the small sigh of the house settling, the quiet breath after all the western fire and bronze. Here, the dragon never needed to roar. He only needed to arrive, and he always does. The night has grown wide and listening now, the kind of dark that feels like a canyon you could fall into forever. Somewhere far away a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. Let the quiet stretch, and come with me across a quiet ocean to a continent still breathing under cedar and sage, where the sky and the underworld speak the same language. Here, the dragon never chose between wings and water. It simply became both. High above the plains, when summer heat shimmers off the grass until the horizon dances, you can see the Thunderbird arrive. It is not a bird the way an eagle is a bird. It is the storm-wearing feathers. Its wings are black clouds edged with lightning. Its eyes the sudden white flash that makes children hide their faces. When it beats those wings, the thunder rolls out like a drum made from the hollow of the world itself. Old men on horseback feel it in their ribs before they hear it in their ears, and they nod, because the grass was thirsty and the Thunderbird has remembered. But every Thunderbird has its mirror below the ground. Deep in the rivers, in the still green pools under cottonwoods, in the turquoise lakes that no white man found for centuries, lives the horned serpent, or the underwater panther, or the great feather snake. Names change with the language, but the feeling stays the same. Its body is long and shining, sometimes covered in iridescent scales, sometimes in sleek otter fur, always with horns or antlers that glow faintly like moonlit crystal. Where the Thunderbird brings the rain, the serpent brings the river's answer. The sudden rise after drought, the quiet flood that leaves rich silt instead of ruin. They are not enemies, they are married. When the Thunderbird screams and lightning forks down, the horned serpent rises to meet it. Their bodies cross in the storm like lovers embracing, and for one heartbeat the whole world is lit violet and silver. Then the rain falls straight and sweet, and every leaf turns its face upward in gratitude. Here is a small, gentle detail that always makes my heart soft. Among the Haudenosaunee, medicine societies still keep tiny carved serpents made of antler or river stone. When someone is very ill, the healer places the carving on the patient's chest and sings about the time the Thunderbird and the serpent argued over who loved the people more. In the song, they finally decide to share the work. One sends water from above, the other sends healing from below, and the sick person breathes easier by morning. The carving is warm when the song ends, as if something large had rested there for a while. Historians still argue whether the horned serpent began as memories of huge prehistoric crocodiles whose bones wash out of southern riverbanks, or whether the first thunderclap simply needed a mate and the rivers offered one. The people who lived with both never needed to choose. They only needed to listen. On the northwest coast, the stories grow taller with the cedars. There the Thunderbird is so huge that when it lands on a mountain, the trees bow flat for a mile around. Salmon leap higher in the rivers because they feel the shadow pass overhead. And beneath the same mountains, in caves where the air smells of cold stone and bat wings, lives the double-headed serpent, Sisutel, whose gaze can turn a warrior to stone, but whose belt, if you are brave enough to earn it, makes you invincible. Canoe paddlers carve his likeness on the prow, so the water itself will recognize family and carry them safely home. Farther south, in the desert where the sun burns white at noon, the Hopi speak of the feathered serpent who taught the people to plant corn in neat rows and to dance when the rain finally came. When the cloud terraces build over the mazes, you can see him spiraling upward on the hot air, wings made of rainbow mist, calling the thunder with a voice like distant flutes. Children across the continent grew up knowing the same truth. Never mock a storm, never dam a river without asking, never forget that the sky and the underworld are only 2 rooms of the same house, and we live in the hallway between them. There is a quiet Lakota story I love. An old woman once dreamed she was walking along the Milky Way, which her people call the Spirit Road, when she met a huge serpent made of starlight. It had thunderbirds nested in its antlers like baby eagles. The serpent told her, "Tell the people we are tired of being feared. We only want to bring water and corn and songs." When she woke, the drought had broken and the prairie was loud with frogs. In the Andes, the same marriage wears different clothes. Amaru, the twin-headed rainbow serpent, rises from mountain lakes when the snow melts and carries the water down to the fields in his mouth. Above him flies the condor, messenger of the upper world, and when the two meet over a village, the rainbow appears, a bright bridge saying the balance is still good. Everywhere the pattern repeats, gentle as breathing. The winged one above, the coiling one below, and between them the thin skin of the world where corn grows and children sleep under quilts stitched with both their images. So tonight, when thunder rumbles far off like a grandfather turning over in his chair, or when rain taps the roof in no hurry at all, think of the great ones meeting again. The thunderbird spreads wings wide enough to cover whole provinces. The horned serpent lifts his antlers, dripping with river light, and for one slow heartbeat, they touch sky to water, fire to earth, noise to silence, and the world is watered. The storm is never punishment here. It is only love arriving with its sleeves rolled up, ready to work. Listen, can you feel the small vibration in the window pane? That is only the echo of wings older than mountains, and the quiet answer of water that has never forgotten how to rise. The night has turned the colour of wet teak now, warm and dark and smelling faintly of frangipani left too long in a bowl. Somewhere a gecko clicks once, soft as a fingertip on porcelain. Let the quiet open like a lotus after rain, and come with me to the place where the rivers are wide and slow, where the rice paddies shine like broken mirrors under the moon, and every temple roof curves upward so the Nagas can climb down without hurting their bellies. Here the dragon never chose between heaven and earth. He simply lives in the doorway. You meet him first as water, a long green coil sliding under a wooden bridge at twilight, scales flashing the same emerald as young rice. A fisherman bows without thinking, palms together, because the river has just given him a net full of silver fish, and he knows who to thank. Later, in the same evening, the same fisherman looks up and sees clouds shaped exactly like that coil, only now the scales are moonlight on monsoon vapour. He smiles, because the Naga has followed him home without ever leaving the sky. They are never far away. In Thailand, the grand staircases of temples are flanked by Nagas, whose bodies become the handrails. 7 heads fanned like cobra hoods at the bottom. Mouths open in gentle warning. Step softly. This is a place where worlds touch. Children run their small hands along the cool stone scales on their way to offer lotus buds, and the Nagas let them, because children carry the same halfway magic, neither fully earth nor fully sky. In Cambodia, at Angkor, the great causeway to the temple is a bridge carried on the backs of gods and demons pulling on a massive Naga like a rope. The serpent's body loops 9 times, calm as breathing, while the giants strain forever. Tourists take photographs and hurry on, but old women selling incense pause to pour a little water at the Naga's tail and whisper, "Thanks for safe journeys." The stone is always wet there, even in dry season. Here is a small, half-secret detail that makes me smile every time. In Lao villages, when a baby is born, the midwife ties a thin white thread around the infant's wrist and another around the house post. Both threads are blessed by calling the house Naga, who lives under the central pillar. As long as the threads stay knotted, the baby's soul cannot wander too far at night, because the Naga keeps one end in his mouth, like a kitten carried gently by the scruff. When the child is old enough to walk, the thread is untied and buried with rice and a silver coin. The Naga is paid, the debt is remembered, and the child grows up unafraid of rain. Historians still argue whether the Naga began as memories of real pythons, thick as a man's waist, gliding through flooded fields, or whether the first sight of a rainbow touching earth after storm simply needed a body. The people who live beside both never needed the argument settled. They only know that when the monsoon arrives early and the river rises kindly instead of cruelly, someone must have left the right offering at the right spirit house. And the offerings are never grand. A cracked clay cup of rice whiskey, a single chicken egg painted red, a circle of marigolds floating on banana leaf. The Naga is royal, but not proud. He accepts what is given with love and gives back in water that stays within its banks, in cobras that bite only the wicked, in dreams that come cool the forehead on fevered nights. There is a quiet story from the Mekong, told in whispers, because it is almost too beautiful to speak aloud. A novice monk once fell asleep under a Bodhi tree during afternoon meditation. He dreamed he was drowning in brown water thick with lotus roots. A Naga, with the face of his long-dead grandmother, rose beside him, placed the pearl from under her chin into his hand, and said, "Breathe." When he woke, the pearl was gone, but his lungs were clear for the first time since childhood illness, and every monsoon after that, he could predict the day the river would crest by the scent alone. He lived to 97 and never feared water again. At night, the temples glow with butter lamps, and the Nagas carved along the eaves seem to move when the flames flicker. Monks in saffron walk the corridors, chanting in Pali, their voices low and liquid, and sometimes the chant is answered by a soft hiss of wind through bamboo that was not there a moment ago. No one looks up. Everyone smiles the small, private smile of people who share a house with a very large, very courteous guest. In Bali, the rice terraces climb the mountains like green staircases to the sky, and every irrigation channel has its own small Naga, keeping the water moving downhill in exactly the right amount. When a channel clogs, the farmer does not curse. He burns a little incense, sprinkles rice, and waits. By morning the leaves and silt are gone, swept away as neatly as if a long tongue had licked the stone clean. Even the shadow puppeteers know the Naga's shape. When the oil lamp flares behind the screen, the serpent's body flows across the white cloth in one unbroken line, head swaying to the gamelan's bronze heartbeat. Children watch wide-eyed, while the Dalang's voice drops to a whisper. The Naga is not angry, only reminding the hero that pride makes the river muddy. The hero bows, the Naga bows back, and the water runs clear again. So when you hear rain on the roof tonight, soft and steady as a mother's palm on a fevered brow, think of the long emerald body sliding between earth and heaven. Think of temple steps worn smooth by bare feet and offerings. Of pearls glowing under chins that have never learned to snarl. Of white threads keeping small souls safe while the monsoon does its slow, courteous dance. The Naga is still there, curled around the base of whatever pillar holds your own house upright. He does not ask for worship, only respect the way you respect deep water, by not turning your back too quickly. Listen, the rain is his breath, the thunder far off is only his jewelry shifting as he turns over in sleep. The night has grown thin and sharp now, the kind of cold that slips under the blanket edges and finds the small hollows behind your knees. Outside, the stars feel closer, hard and bright as frost nails hammered into black wood. Let the quiet bite just a little and come north with me, far north, where the sea throws itself against cliffs all winter and the wind has teeth. Here the dragon learned to love gold the way glaciers love silence. His name is different in every fjord, Fafnir, Nidhogger, Jörmungandr, but the feeling is always the same, something long and cold and patient lying just under the skin of the world, waiting for the day everything ends. The ground is iron hard 9 months of the year, and when spring finally softens it, the plough sometimes turns up ribs longer than a boat's keel. Whale bones, mostly, driven inland by ancient floods, bleached white and curving like frozen waves. Men stand in the furrow and stare, because the ribs that size belong to something that could swallow longships whole. Children grow up knowing the bones are only sleeping. On the longest nights, when the sun barely lifts its rim above the horizon before sinking again, the old women light a single seal oil lamp and tell how the Midgard serpent circles the entire sea with its tail in mouth. If he ever lets go, the oceans will spill over the land and the last battle will begin. They say it softly, the way you warn a child not to pull the cat's tail, because the serpent might be listening. The lamp flame leans toward the door, as if the house itself is leaning in to hear. Here is a small, grim detail that still makes me shiver. In certain peat bogs of Denmark and Sweden, archaeologists find iron swords bent double and sunk deep, offerings to keep the greedier dragons asleep. Sometimes the swords are wrapped in gold thread, sometimes a whole torque is twisted around the blade and hilt. The metal is always cold, even after centuries, as if the dragon's breath still clings to it. Historians still argue whether the Norse dragon began as memories of walrus herds seen through sea mist tusks like spears, bodies like overturned boats, or whether the first sight of an aurora twisting green and red across the sky simply needed a body to carry that much cold fire. The Skalds never cared about the argument. They only knew that when a man kills his brother for a cursed ring, the corpse sometimes opens its eyes again and speaks with a serpent's tongue. Fafnir was not born a dragon. He was born a man who wanted too much. The story is quiet at first. 2 brothers, a dwarf-forged hoard, a knife in the dark. When the surviving brother crawls out of the cave at dawn, he is already changing. Scales push through skin like frost flowers, forcing their way through snow. His voice drops to a hiss that makes ravens fall silent. By nightfall he is coiled on the gold, wings folded tight, eyes burning with the same dull shine as the metal he guards. The treasure is cold, always cold, no matter how long his belly presses against it. That is the curse. He can never be warm again. People still left him alone for 3 generations. Then came Sigurd. The boy was barely bearded, but his heart was steady. He dug a pit in the dragon's path, lay in it with sword pointed upward, and waited, while the ground shook with each slow step. When the serpent passed overhead, heart thumping like winter surf, Sigurd drove the blade up under the left shoulder where no scale grows. The dragon screamed once, a sound that cracked ice on the fjord miles away, then folded in on himself like a sail with the wind suddenly gone. Blood hissed where it touched snow. Sigurd bathed in it, and where it touched his skin he became invulnerable, except for one small place between the shoulder blades, where a linden leaf had stuck. Even heroes carry a soft spot. Yet the gold stayed cursed. Everyone who touched it after died badly. That is the world-encircling serpent, Jörmungandr. Fishermen sometimes hook him by accident. The line goes singing out until the boat heels and the gunwale dips under black water. Wise men cut the line at once and row for shore without looking back. Thor once tried to lift him in the shape of a giant's cat, and even the thunder god's arms trembled. The serpent only purred, a sound like glaciers carving, and let himself be put down again. The day they truly fight, the poets say, the sky will split and the sea will pour through the crack. On the shortest day of the year, in halls built of pine and smoke, the skalds sing of Nidhugger beneath the world tree. He gnaws the roots slowly, patiently, the way time gnaws everything. Corpse-slick scales, eyes blind with graveyard dark, he chews and waits. When the last battle he will rise, dripping with dew from the dead, wings ragged as old sails, and the stars will go out one by one. But even here, in the coldest telling, there is a strange tenderness. When Ragnarök comes, and the serpent finally releases his tail, the oceans will flood the land, yes, but they will also wash it clean. After the fire and the drowning, a new green world lifts itself from the water, and a woman and a man step out holding hands. The dragon's last gift is a bath big enough to start over. There is an old custom still kept in the Faroe Islands. When a whale beaches, the people share the meat and oil, but the skull is always returned to the sea on a small boat with no oars. They push it out at slack tide and watch it drift until it sinks, payment and apology in one slow ceremony. The sea takes the bones back, and the dragons sleep a little longer. So when the wind finds the crack under your door tonight and slides across the floor like cold water, think of those northern dragons coiled around their small, bright treasures. Think of whale ribs glowing under northern lights, of cursed gold that can never warm the hand that holds it, of a serpent so large he holds the world together by biting his own tail. The cold is only a reminder that everything vast has a heart somewhere, even if it beats once every 1,000 years. The night up there is long, but it is honest. The dragons do not pretend to be kind. They only ask that we remember desire has a price, and the sea always wins in the end. The night has grown so quiet you can almost hear the candle inside your own chest burning lower. Outside, the world is nothing but soft dark, and the faint scratch of bare branches against the window like a quill testing parchment. Let that small sound carry you back to a time when every book was a cathedral built of calfskin and lamplight, and dragons lived in the margins, waiting for sleepy eyes to wander. In the scriptoria of medieval Europe, the air always smelled of oak gall ink, warm wax, and the faint iron of fear. Monks sat hunched on wooden stools, goose quill in hand, copying holy words by the flicker of tallow that smelled of sheep. Their fingers were stained black to the knuckle, and their breath fogged in winter so thickly that sometimes they had to pause and wipe the page with a sleeve. It was slow, sacred, freezing work, and the mind, left alone for hours, began to wander the way a tethered goat wanders to the end of its rope and back again. That is when the dragons crept in. At first they were small, a little winged serpent curled around the capital queue, tongue flicking out to taste the gold leaf. Then they grew bolder. A monk finishing a long psalm might glance down and discover he had, without thinking, drawn a dragon biting its own tail around the entire paragraph. He would blink, cross it out with 2 quick strokes, and the next brother to use the book would quietly add wings to the crossed-out shape so the creature could escape the page. By candle's end, the margin was alive with quiet mischief. Here is a gentle, slightly wicked detail that always makes me smile. In one 13th century bestiary, now kept in the Bodleian Library, a dragon in the lower margin has been given spectacles and a tiny tonsure. The monk who added it wrote beside him, "In Latin so small it needs a magnifying glass." Brother Draco complains the light is poor for reading. Someone centuries later drew a tiny candle in the dragon's claw. The joke is still warm after 800 years. Historians still argue whether these marginal dragons were boredom, devotion, or genuine terror leaking onto the page. Probably all 3. The world outside the monks knew was ringed by blank spaces on every map. Hic sunt dracones, written in red ink where the parchment ended and the unknown began. Sailors came back, if they came back with stories of sea serpents that rose beside the ship and looked the helmsman in the eye before sliding under again. Pilgrims swore they had seen winged shadows circling the peaks of the Alps at twilight. And every castle had its own tale of a worm sleeping under the hill, woken only when someone dug too greedily for silver. So the monks drew what they feared, and by drawing it they tamed it a little. In the great Mappe Mundi the dragons grew enormous. On the Hereford map, near the edge of the world, a scarlet serpent with bat wings and a lion's mane coils around the word Ethiopia, mouth open as if tasting the air for Christian souls. Beside him a careful hand wrote, "Here be dragons and men with heads beneath their shoulders." The ink is still bright, because fear keeps its colour longer than faith sometimes. Yet the same parchment that warned of monsters also carried the Psalter, and there the dragons changed tone. In the Luttrell Psalter, a knight in bright mail calmly spears a green dragon, while a lady in a wimple watches from a safe distance, hands folded as though she is only waiting for tea. The dragon looks mildly surprised rather than angry, as if he showed up for a duel and discovered it was merely Tuesday. The monk who painted him added tiny flowers growing where the blood should be. Even in death, the creature is allowed beauty. Travellers' tales fed the margins. Marco Polo wrote of crocodiles in China, so large they could swallow a man whole, and the scribes back home quietly added wings and fire so the beast would feel properly distant. When news came of comets or earthquakes, the monks illustrated the letters with dragons wearing crowns of flame, because catastrophe needed a face, and a serpent's face is easier to forgive than God's silence. In the cloister gardens, the brothers sometimes found shed snake skins caught on rose thorns, translucent and perfect. They carried them inside and laid them between pages as bookmarks, without telling the abbot. "A dragon's skin," they whispered, "even a small one, kept the larger ones away. No one laughed. The night was too large, and the walls were only stone." There is a lovely, lonely story from a Carthusian monastery in the French Alps. A young illustrator named Brother Etienne was given the task of illuminating a book of hours for a noble lady. On the page for the hour of Compline he painted a small blue dragon curled asleep around the border, wings folded like a bat's, tail tucked neatly over its nose. When the book was delivered, the lady wrote back that every night at Compline she heard soft breathing that was not her own, and she slept better than she had in years. Brother Etienne was scolded for whimsy, but they let him keep the little dragon, and 50 years later, when he died, they buried the page with him. The rest of the book is in Vienna now, but that one leaf is missing, gone to keep an old man company under the frost. So when you switch off the last light tonight, and the room sinks into its own kind of vellum dark, think of those patient monks bent over their desks, turning fear into colour, one careful stroke at a time. Think of dragons, small enough to fit in a margin, yet large enough to hold the whole unknown. Some breathed fire, some only sighed, but all of them were drawn with love, because the hand that draws a monster is also the hand that prays. The maps have been filled in now, the blank spaces crowded with names and borders, but the margins are still there, inside every book, inside every quiet room at the edge of sleep. And sometimes, when the page of the night is almost blank, a small winged shape appears in the corner of your eye, curls once and settles. It is only keeping the unknown warm until morning. The night has settled into that deep, velvet hush where even the clock seems to breathe more slowly. Outside, the air carries the faint memory of spices no kitchen in your house has ever held. Cumin, saffron, something smoky and far away. Let that scent drift in, and come walk with me along a road that never truly ended, a thin ribbon of dust and camel bells stretching from Chang'an to Constantinople, from Samarkand to Venice, where every caravanserai courtyard smelled of tea, horse sweat and stories. Here the dragon learned to speak many languages at once. At dusk the merchants gathered around low fires, boots crusted with the day's road, silk bolts unrolled like bright rivers across their knees. A Chinese trader would tell of the Long who rose from the Yellow River to guide the first emperor's barge through fog. A Persian sitting cross-legged beside him would nod and add that in his grandfather's village the same dragon was called Ajdaha and wore a crown of 7 gems, but still brought gentle rain. A Greek from Antioch, beard curled with Babylonian oil, would laugh softly and say that sounded exactly like the drakon that guarded the golden fleece, except his version preferred maidens to rain. They would all drink from the same bowl of fermented mare's milk, passing it hand to hand, and by the time the bowl was empty, the dragon had 4 legs, wings, antlers, and a pearl under its chin, and no one could remember who had added which part. That is how the Silk Road stitched the beasts together, one quiet evening at a time. Here is a small, perfect detail that still warms me. In the bazaar of Kashgar, archaeologists once found a child's wooden toy, half Chinese cloud dragon, half Persian lion dragon, carved from a single piece of mulberry wood. The wings were painted red on one side, gold on the other, so when the child spun it on a string, the dragon seemed to change shape in mid-air. The toy is 1,200 years old and still bright. Someone loved it very much. Historians still argue whether the winged dragon of Europe owes its wings to Persian carpets that showed Chinese cloud dragons flying without them, or whether the Chinese pearl under the chin came from stories of Alexander's soldiers bringing back tales of fire-breathing guardians in India. The merchants never argued, they only traded. In the mountain passes of the Pamir, where the air is so thin breathing feels like sipping ice, caravans sometimes met Buddhist monks walking the other direction, carrying scrolls wrapped in yellow silk. The monks spoke of Nagas, who lived in lakes beneath the peaks and emerged only to listen to the Dharma. When a snow leopard followed the caravan for 3 days, the monks said it was a Naga wearing fur because the altitude was cold. The Persian horsemaster laughed, then stopped laughing when the leopard vanished at dawn and a rainbow touched the exact spot where it had stood. After that, he left a little butter at every high pass, for whichever shape the guardian prefers today. In the libraries of Baghdad, scholars translated Greek texts about Typhon and Chinese texts about the yellow dragon into Arabic on the same day, sometimes on facing pages. One illuminator, working late by oil light, quietly gave the Greek monster the curling whiskers of a long, and the Chinese dragon the bat wings of a European worm. When the caliph asked why, the artist bowed and said, "So they will recognize each other when they meet in dreams." The caliph smiled and let the page stand. Further west, in the mosaic floors of Byzantine churches, you begin to see the change. Dragons that once crushed saints underfoot now curl protectively around the tree of life, scales shimmering in lapis and gold, eyes gentle. The Greek word drakon and the Persian azdaha and the Chinese long all meant clear seeing, and somewhere along the road the artists decided clear seeing might include mercy. Even the Vikings felt the wind shift. When Norse traders reached Constantinople and saw icons of St. George spearing a dragon that looked suspiciously like their own Jörmungandr wearing a pearl necklace, they did not laugh. They bought the icons, carried them home in sealskin pouches, and hung them above the hearth. Some carpenters quietly stopped carving serpent heads on their longships, with mouths open in rage. Instead, they gave the beasts calm eyes and curling Chinese whiskers, so the ship could ride both the western storms and the eastern rains. There is a quiet story from a caravanserai near Merv. A Chinese princess travelling to marry a Persian prince grew ill from the long road. That night, a sandstorm buried the courtyard knee-deep in gold dust. In the morning, the storm was gone and the princess was well. Beside her bed lay a single scale the size of a sycamore leaf, iridescent green shot through with scarlet. The princess kept it all her life sewn inside her sleeve. When she died, her Persian son had it set into the pommel of his sword, and every battle he fought ended with fewer dead than expected. The sword is lost now, but the story still travels. By the time Marco Polo reached the court of Kublai Khan, the dragon waiting for him wore a face stitched from every campfire tale between Venice and Cathay. It had the antlers of the east, the wings of the west, the pearl of wisdom and the fire of warning, the gentle rain and the terrible braided together like the patterned silk the Khan gifted the Venetian boy. Marco wrote it all down carefully, and when he came home old and sick, he still whispered to his nieces that the dragon was real, only very large and very patient, and it had looked at him with eyes, the colour of both sunrise and sunset at once. So when you smell a trace of something foreign on the night air tonight, cardamom maybe, or the ghost of incense, think of those long roads where camels knelt under starlight and men from opposite ends of the world shared the same fire. Think of dragons learning new shapes the way children learn new words, slowly, delightedly, without ever forgetting the old ones. The Silk Road has crumbled into grass and memory, but the dragon it wove still flies. Sometimes without wings, sometimes with, sometimes breathing fire, sometimes only breathing cloud. He has many names now, and none. He belongs to no single country, no single story. He belongs to the quiet space between one heartbeat and the next, where east and west touch like hands across a small, warm fire. And he is still travelling. Listen, can you hear the faint jingle of distant camel bells? That is only the dragon, moving softly through the dark, carrying the whole long, bright, impossible tale on his back, looking for the next campfire where someone might offer him a bowl of tea and a place to rest his many-shaped head. The night has grown so still that even the small sounds inside the room, your own breathing, the faint creak of the bed frame, feel like they belong to a larger hush. Somewhere far below the house, water moves through pipes the way it once moved through limestone caves, slow and patient and older than memory. Let that quiet drip carry you forward now, to a time when candles were replaced by oil lamps, and oil lamps by gas, and the dragon, for the first time, was asked to show his skeleton. It began with a letter. In 1663, a Swiss naturalist named Johann Jakob Scheuchzer received a package from a quarry near Altdorf. Inside, wrapped in coarse cloth, lay a slab of shale split neatly in two. Between the halves was pressed the perfect outline of a creature with a long skull, sharp teeth, and what looked very much like wings. The quarryman had sent it because everyone knew Herr Dr. Scheuchzer collected dragonstones. He opened the package at his desk by candlelight, and for a long moment simply stared. Then he wrote, in a hand that trembled only slightly, Homo diluvi testis, man who witnessed the flood. He believed he had found the bones of a sinner drowned by Noah's rain. He published a careful engraving of the fossil the next year, and all of Europe leaned in to look. It was, of course, a giant salamander. But no one laughed very hard. The shape was close enough to keep hope warm. That was the first crack in the cave wall. A century later, in the misty valleys of Bavaria, quarrymen blasting for limestone began pulling out bones too large to carry. Thigh bones taller than a man, vertebrae like millstones, teeth curved like Turkish swords. The local peasants called them Drachenbein and left bowls of milk at the quarry gate. The scholars who arrived from Munich and Tübingen called them something else. Megalosaurus, Iguanodon, Hylaeosaurus. The words felt clumsy in the mouth at first, like new boots, but they fit better with each passing season. In England, a quiet country doctor named Gideon Mantell walked the Sussex lanes with his wife Mary, turning over stones the way other couples turned over conversation. One spring afternoon in 1822, Mary found a handful of teeth the size of walnuts, worn smooth and brown as tobacco. Gideon carried them home in his handkerchief and spent the next 3 years comparing them to every living creature he could borrow, elephant, walrus, crocodile, until he realized none of them matched. He wrote to the greatest anatomist in London, Sir Richard Owen, and Owen, who disliked being puzzled, finally declared in 1841 that these belonged to a distinct tribe of ancient reptiles. He gave them a name that rolled like distant thunder, Dinosauria, terrible lizards. The dragon blinked, and half its magic slipped away, but only half, because the bones were beautiful. They lay in the rock exactly where they had fallen millions of years earlier, ribs curved like cathedral vaults, tails long enough to sweep a ballroom floor. When the first complete skeleton was mounted in Crystal Palace in 1854, crowds stood in line for hours just to walk beneath its shadow. Children reached up on tiptoe to touch the iron supports, half expecting the creature to breathe. Grown men removed their hats without being asked. The dragon had become bones, yes, but bones so vast they still felt like myth wearing a new coat. Meanwhile, in the mountains of Western America, 2 paleontologists who hated each other, Othniel Marsh and Edward Cope, raced across the Badlands with wagons and dynamite, unearthing creatures with plates along their backs and horns above their eyes. Newspapers called it the Bone Wars. Farmers sold their land for pennies just to watch the professors argue over who owned the bigger dragon. In 1899, near Como Bluff, Wyoming, a crew uncovered a long, graceful neck that rose 20 feet when assembled. They named her Apatosaurus, but the old hands on the dig still called her Brontosaurus, thunder lizard, and the name stuck like burrs. Here is a small, tender detail most books leave out. When the first Tyrannosaurus skull was unpacked in New York in 1906, the night watchman at the museum refused to be left alone with it. He swore the eye sockets followed him when he walked past. The curator laughed, then quietly placed a lantern inside the skull so the light glowed through the fenestrae like slow fire. After that, the watchman slept easier. Even science, it seemed, understood the need for a little flame. Historians still argue whether the word dinosaur killed the dragon or merely gave it a new skin to wear. The truth is gentler. The dragon simply stepped aside and let the bones speak for a while. In village pubs across Europe, old men still insisted the giants had once flown, and when pterosaur skeletons began appearing, wings of leather stretched over fingers, longer than a man is tall, the old men nodded and said they had always known. In China, the change arrived more softly. Farmers had been selling dragon bones to apothecaries for centuries, grinding them into powder for strength and long life. When Western paleontologists arrived in the 1922 and asked to see the places the bones came from, the farmers led them to the hills around Jokudian and watched quietly while foreigners on hands and knees brushed dust from nests of fossil eggs. No one was surprised. Of course, the long had laid eggs. How else would rain be born? There is a quiet photograph from Mongolia in 1923. Roy Chapman Andrews, hat pushed back, kneeling beside the first Protoceratops skull ever seen by modern eyes. The beak is sharp, the frill flared like a warrior's shield, the eye sockets deep and knowing. Behind Andrews stands a Mongolian guide, smiling faintly, because to him the skull is simply a death mask of the griffin that guards buried gold. Both men are right. The desert wind moves across them both, carrying sand the colour of old pearls. By the middle of the 20th century, the caves had been emptied of their largest secrets. The dragon skeleton stood in museums under soft electric light, labelled and measured and loved in a new way. Children pressed their palms to glass cases and felt the same hush their ancestors felt around campfires. The bones no longer needed to breathe fire, they only needed to be real. And yet, every paleontologist who has ever brushed dust from a vertebra will tell you the same thing in private. When the lights are turned low and the museum is locked for the night, the long shadows still move a little. Not much, just enough to remind you that something enormous once walked here, and part of it is still walking. The dragon simply traded scales for stone, wings for wishbones, fire for the slow burn of deep time. Tonight, when you shift under the blanket and feel the small ache of your own bones settling, think of those caves and quarries and badlands still holding their breath. Think of the quiet men and women with soft brushes and infinite patience who asked the dragon to show his true face, and how gently he answered, "The bones are only sleeping. They always were." And somewhere in the dark between one fossil and the next, the dragon is still breathing, slow as geology, warm as the memory of wings. The night has thinned to its gentlest hour, the one where even the dark feels like it's listening. Outside, the streetlights have dimmed to embers, and the whole world seems to be breathing in the same slow rhythm as your own chest. Let that shared breath carry us forward to a time when the dragon no longer needed bones to be real. He only needed a story told with love. It began quietly, the way all true revolutions begin. In 1898, a soft-spoken English clergyman's son named Kenneth Grahame wrote a bedtime letter to his small boy about a reluctant dragon who preferred poetry to pillaging. 20 years later, a shy librarian in Oxford named J.R.R. Tolkien met a scarred, lonely creature named Chrysophylax in a farmer's field and let him live. Then, in 1937, a gentle professor drew a small ink sketch of a proud, worried dragon curled around a golden cup and named him Smaug. The sketch was never meant for anyone else's eyes, but the dragon's expression, half ancient king, half wounded child, slipped into the margins and notebooks, and finally onto the pages of a red book that children carried like treasure. The world was ready to forgive him. After centuries of being the monster under the bridge, the dragon discovered he could be the last of his kind, the keeper of lost knowledge, the one who remembers when the rest of us have forgotten how to be kind. Storytellers gave him sorrowful eyes, the colour of winter rivers, wings like cathedral windows, and a voice that rumbled with the weight of mountains. They let him speak in complete sentences, and what he said was almost always, "I am tired of being feared." Here is a small, luminous detail that still makes my throat tight. When Disney's Pete's Dragon was released in 1977, thousands of children wrote letters to Elliot the Invisible, gentle dragon who only wanted a family, telling him where they lived in case he ever needed a place to land. The studio kept every letter. Some are still in a quiet warehouse, edges soft with handling, crayon drawings of apple trees and open windows. Historians still argue whether the shift came because the world had grown safer, no longer needing a monster to blame, or because it had grown lonelier and needed something ancient to understand grief. Probably both. Either way, the dragon stepped into the space we left open. In 1967, a young illustrator named Ruth Stiles Gannett gave us a baby dragon who could not yet fly, and a boy who believed in him anyway. In 1974, Ursula K. Le Guin let dragons speak philosophy on wind-swept islands and choose their own names. In 1989, Cressida Cowell drew a tiny black dragon who thought he was a failure because he was too small to burn villages, and named him Toothless. Children laughed and cried in the same breath because they recognized the feeling. Even the fire changed. It became something you could warm your hands at instead of run from. Anne McCaffrey let her dragons bond for life with lonely teenagers on a distant planet, their minds touching like quiet music. Naomi Novik gave them naval uniforms and wry conversation over tea. George R.R. Martin made them beautiful weapons and then let one small girl whisper them back into love. In every telling, the dragon kept the grandeur but traded terror for tenderness, and we leaned in closer. There is a moment I love in the 2002 film Reign of Fire. The last male dragon, huge and black and terrible, rises above ruined London at sunset. For a second, the old fear flares. This is the end of everything. Then he spreads wings like torn sails, and the light catches the sorrow in his eyes, and you understand he is only trying to protect the last 2 eggs of his kind. When he dies, the humans do not cheer. They stand in silence, because something noble has just gone out of the world. The dragon taught us, finally, how to mourn. Tonight, somewhere, a child is falling asleep, clutching a plush dragon whose wings are worn soft from hugging. Somewhere else, a teenager is rereading the same page for the 10th time because the dragon just said, "I was not always this alone." Somewhere an adult closes a book with wet eyes and whispers thank you to an author who let the monster be the hero. The bones in the museums are still there, vast and patient under glass. But the living dragon has moved into quieter rooms. The glow of a bedside lamp, the hush between thunder and rain, the small hollow in the chest where loneliness used to live. He no longer needs to roar. He only needs to be seen. And we see him now not as warning, not as enemy, but as the oldest friend we almost forgot we had. A creature who remembers when the sky was wider, when magic was ordinary, when being different was simply another way to be alive. The night is gentle with him, and with us. The dragon is here. He has always been. He is only waiting for you to remember his name. The night is almost over now. The first pale edge of morning is already pressing against the curtains, thin as the membrane of an eggshell. And still, somewhere between one breath and the next, you can feel it, the same quiet presence that watched our ancestors touch the first giant bone under starlight, the same long body that learned to carry thunder, rain, grief, and finally forgiveness. We thought we had outgrown dragons. We filled the maps, turned on the lights, explained the bones. Yet every time we close our eyes, something vast and ancient curls gently around the small flame we still carry inside. Tomorrow the world will be loud again. Tonight, the dragon is simply here, warm, patient, breathing with us. That breath is still here, warm, patient, waiting in the quiet just before morning. The coals are ash now. The plain is quiet. 2 hours ago we stood beside the very first campfire and largest bone ever found by human eyes. We have walked every continent, every century, every kind of night. And we have learned one quiet truth. The dragon never lived in the bones, or in the storms, or in the gold, or even in the margins of old books. The dragon has only ever lived in the space between a heartbeat and the next breath, in the place where we are small and the world is suddenly breathtakingly large. Every culture gave him a different face, but all of them gave him the same job: to remind us that wonder is older than fear, and that even the most terrifying thing can be loved if someone is brave enough to look long enough. So when morning comes and the light creeps in, and the ordinary day begins again, carry this with you. Somewhere inside your chest, an ancient creature is still turning over in its sleep, dreaming the same dream humanity has dreamed for 170,000 nights. He has no need of wings anymore. He only needs you to keep the small flame burning a little longer. Thank you for walking this long night with me. The dragon is still breathing, and so are we.